How's it going, guys? It's Cass. So in PoE1, some of the easiest ways to increase your chaos damage were Despair and Wither, and those are the exact same in PoE2, but how they function are slightly different. So in this video, we're going to talk about some of the differences between PoE1 and PoE2, and we're going to talk about why you should be using these skills in every single poison build you play. The main thing about Despair that is different is the cost of Despair on top of how Despair functions. So Despair in PoE2 has a pretty hefty cost when it comes to intelligence. It's 71 intelligence at level 9, and level 9 is the lowest version of this gem that you can do. Fortunately, using a low level Despair is still perfectly okay, because the difference between a level 9 Despair and a level 15 Despair is literally just 1% of the chaos resistance. In order to get 1% more, you'd have to get almost or more than double the amount of int in order to use a level 15 Despair. And that's why I think just using a low level Despair is the right move in PoE2. On top of that, in PoE1, whenever you cast a curse, the curse would apply instantly. Once you casted it, the enemy would be cursed as long as you got hit by the radius. The radius was also fairly large. In PoE2, they work differently. They have a 1 second time before they explode, and then once they explode is when the curse is actually applied. So there are some situations where if a mob is quick, you may have to predict the movement of the mob in order to actually hit it with the curse. I did notice there's a little bit of auto-targeting that happens with curses, as long as you are casting the curse on while hovering over the enemy. This was noticeable when fighting the monkey boss in Act 3 or Act 2, I think it was Act 3. That boss ran super fast, but if you cast the curse directly on the boss while hovering over it, sometimes it would predict the movement and make it so it would hit the boss where it would be 1 second later. Now that was a little glitchy, sometimes it wouldn't actually work like that, but it is something that's nice for mobs that are very fast. Now let's go ahead and talk about the supports that we're using in conjunction with Despair. The first thing is Persistence. Persistence makes it have 40% more skill effect duration. So without Persistent, the baseline skill effect duration is 7.2 seconds. With Persistence, it's now 10 seconds. So basically you get 3 more seconds where you don't have to cast another Despair. The next support is the best support for any curse, and that is Heightened Curse. It's give you 25% increased curse effect for your specific curse. For Despair, it increases it from negative 33 chaos res to negative 41 chaos res. Then lastly, we're using Magnified Effect to make the AoE slightly bigger. Now, Magnified Effect actually isn't that crazy impactful, so if you do run into like mana issues randomly, I would suggest dropping Magnified Effect first, because you can see the difference when we actually cast our Despair. The circle's still pretty big without Magnified Effects, and the difference is honestly not that noticeable between the two. It's maybe like a slightly bigger around the edges, but honestly it's not that crazy. So let's go ahead and see what Despair by itself adds to the damage of this character. So the first test is going to be with just Gas Arrow, and we can see that the damage that we do is right around 30,000. We respawn at the checkpoint. And obviously there's different magnitudes, right? So there might be some situations where we just hit significantly harder. But we can see for sure that having Despair is a massive damage increase there. We went up to 46,000 there. So Despair by itself is very, very strong. Now, let's talk about the other thing that we're going to be doing, which is Wither. Wither works the exact same in PoE1 as it does in PoE2. What it is it's a stacking debuff up to 10, where at 10 stacks, you get 50% increased Wither. So each single stack that you apply is 1% increase chaos damage. It's incredibly strong and something you definitely want to have. Now, if you go on the tree and go to this Wither Away keystone, you get 40% increased effect Wither just from these 3 nodes, which increases it from 5% baseline to 7% baseline. And it also gives you this buff here, which just adds passively 1 Wither stack for 8 seconds on enemies around you, which is pretty nice for your clear, and it makes it so you don't have to press the skill that you're applying Wither with. Alright, so in PoE1, the way Withering Touch works is it works on any type of damage. In PoE2, you have to have chaos damage. So you want to make sure that if you are a pure Fizz build like me, that you have this node here, which gives you gain 12% of damage as extra chaos damage, or that you are using this support here, Chaos Infusion. If you're using either of these, you will be able to apply Withering Touch on any skill in the game. So what I have seen people using is Rain of Arrows to apply Withering Touch. So make sure if you're using Rain of Arrows that you have this node here, or that you're using Chaos Infusion. Now, Rain of Arrows is an interesting spell for application of Wither. The reason why I say it's interesting is because I'm not sure if it's actually the best option, because it's not 100% consistent. Sometimes you'll get the max amount of hits, get the max stacks, but as you can see, it takes time to build up all of the stacks. These aren't happening instantly, so by the time you get 70%, sometimes you get 70% at like the very last second, so then the drop off occurs pretty fast. So the actual uptime of 70% increased damage is significantly lower than if you're using a skill that applied instantly. And that skill that I like to use and what I suggest other people use is using Toxic Growth instead. So let's move these up to Toxic Growth so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So now Toxic Growth still requires you to press Gas Arrow, but Gas Arrow is your main ability. So most of the time you're going to be preloading Gas Arrow anyway. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is press our Gas Arrow, then we're going to press our Toxic Growth, and we can see we have 70% for a way longer period, making it so a lot more of our damage is being amped by the maximum amount of Wither. Now that was just Wither baseline, or that was just Toxic Growth baseline with these two supports. What I'd also suggest using is using Conk Effect. Conk Effect just makes it so the consistency of the puddles is more, and makes it so it's much easier to hit with all of the puddles as often as possible. Now once Gem Cutter Prisms get cheaper and you can quality every gem that you're using, it'll make it so Toxic Growth is consistently hitting max Wither stacks every single time, but there are some situations where Toxic Growth may not hit every single setting, but like I said before, it's still much better than having some of the inconsistency of the gradual increase that happens with Rain of Arrows. It is still important to point out though that you still have the 7 seconds when you're in, or the 1 second, 0.7 seconds while you're in the air that you still have to account for. If you're fighting bosses that do one-shot slams, obviously make sure that you aren't pressing Toxic Growth in those windows. But hopefully, with the amount of uptime that you have from Toxic Growth by itself, you'll be able to do a ton more damage just because of that. And that's pretty much it for Wither. You want to just make sure you have as many stacks up as possible, as consistent as possible. So the last question is how much damage does these two modifiers do overall for your character? How worth is it to make sure that you're using it every time? So we're going to test it the easy way we know how. First thing, we're going to see what it's like without using either of them and see the amount of damage that we do. And we can see our damage is right around 35,000 using an unmodified Gas Arrow. Now we respawn at the checkpoint here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to shoot down, or we're going to do our Curse, then we're going to do Toxic, and then we're going to shoot after, just to prove how much more damage we can do here. So everything fell off there, but we can see 83,000 damage. So more than double, almost to the point where we're getting close to triple damage just from pressing 2 separate buttons. So you want to be making sure that you're definitely using these 2 buttons whenever you're playing any poison skill. It's a ton of extra damage for almost no extra effort. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully this helped you guys, and thanks for watching.